Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games from Capo Celeste. This is Etherium, the prototype copy, as you can see in front of me here. Let me show you what you need to know about this game, whether or not it's right for you, and why this might be one of the biggest surprises of January. Let's go. 2 to 4 players, 60 minutes, right? You've got a multi-level terrain going on here with multiple levels of workers that you will have the ability to manipulate around this board in an action programming style of things. But it takes Euro mechanisms, it takes a little bit of your Amerithrash, it mashes them together, it gives them height differential, and you play 7 rounds to get the most victory points in the end. Phases are relatively simple, they're relatively straightforward, simultaneous action selection, and then reveal in initiative order going through your programming 1, 2, 3, 4, potentially 5 and 6, and rinse and repeat. That's it. That's the game in a nutshell. The crux of it, though, is really that action programming phase. At the beginning of the game, you're going to have this 3D terrain set up. You've got the ether here in the middle, then you've got the mining ore, you've got the mountains with the rock and stone, and then you've also got the forest over here where you're mining wood. And on the periphery, you've got the 4 starting cities where you're going to be located at the beginning of the game. And you're going to venture forth using movement, using gathering, using different abilities in order to maximize your various resource management in the first place. So what else do you need to know? Well, let's run you through those 4 phases so that you can get a good sense of what we're actually doing. So at the beginning of every phase, you're going to have one of these season cards. Always starts with nighttime, but then it varies and branches out. Season cards are relatively straightforward. A few of them actually correspond to the color of your particular faction, and that's going to be represented up here. You can see the initiative order will be random every single round as well, and then you also have the ability that is benefited here. So gather, when you gather wood, get 2 additional wood. And so you can start to see that they all gather stone, changes the initiative order. Gather, get -1. Okay, you can start to see, get an extra flash card. We'll talk about those in a second. Get an extra upgrade for a minus room reduced cost. We'll talk about that later. You can see all of these are going to be slight differences there as a whole. Increasing this connection here, and then decreasing the value of a fight, for example, as well. At the beginning of the game, the first phase is always going to be the nighttime one, followed by 6 random of these. Flip it over, no Etherium usage in the first round, and then it says you can use the flash icons during the season phase. And we'll talk about that because the next phase of things is everybody gets 1 of these flash cards, which again are just kind of instants. You can either use them at any time or you can use them specifically during the next phase, phase 3. And so you can see right here, this gray icon means phase 3. You get to steal 2 wood resources, but you can't use it in the first round, which is what that symbol means. So then you get through and you see some of these others. You -1 ether for the cost of that ability. Again, getting 3 wood resources. Again, the difference there being the season, which only is phase 3, but then otherwise the instant can be used anytime in any other phase, including the action programming phase. And so this is going to be a deck that you're going to be drawing from, trying to get, because it's very, very useful. Second useful behind the abilities. So then the third phase is, well, just playing these ones that I mentioned. The fourth phase is the meat of the game as a whole, right? Action programming. You excited? Let's go. So here is your individual action programming board. It gives you everything that you need to know. For each individual faction, shows you the different actions, the costs, as well as where you can place your action programming tiles. And in this case, we actually have a total of 5 on this board, as you can see. And that's because at the beginning of the game, you only start out with actually 4, and you have the ability to upgrade down here in this spot where the 3 is, additional 5th, and then potentially 6th, and then potentially an end game scoring victory condition, which gets you 4 victory points if you do it a 3rd time. But you have to pay the Etherium, which is sort of the master resource of all the game, and the best stuff is going to be acquired with it rather than the individual elements that you're going to be gathering. Otherwise, it's relatively straightforward iconography. Move to this adjacent terrain. Gather from the terrain that you're on. Then upgrade your soldier, upgrade your worker or your gatherer, upgrade your home base, or upgrade your guides. We'll talk about those in a second, how those affect your bases. And then these are the special abilities with the ether. Convert into ether, 3 of any resource total, and then get however many ether back. Grab 3 flash cards, upgrade the abilities, upgrade your boosts, essentially the extra turns that I just mentioned, and then the connection, which is sort of a, if you get high enough on it by rolling a die in combination with your modifiers in the first place, get some awesome benefits to behoove you, but also an end game scoring victory condition as well. That is the board in a nutshell. That's everything that you're going to be doing, and you're just going to be taking these on a turn-by-turn basis, putting them down, hidden behind your little board here so nobody else can see it right there, and then revealing it, and then pulling out these actions simultaneously. 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2. Everybody does their third. Everybody does their fourth. And then if you have a 5 or 6, well, then you get to go extra. That is the main crux of it. But how do you determine? Because all 4 of these factions that are considered in my base game, now I'm guessing there might be a little bit more content based on these season cards we just looked at that have a few more icons along the top. You might have a little expansion content, but the bottom base game part is actually this. And again, with some of these values, and there is some variability, and I've got here various tokens from my home base, as well as my guides that have been upgraded in this game. And so these are going to give you separate abilities. So on my soldier roll, I get to have an additional 3 points for this faction, because this faction in terms of red is actually the super aggressive faction that is more asymmetric towards attacking. Then my connection gets to roll an extra die, 2 dice instead of 1, which gives me a higher chance of getting higher on the random table in the first place. Now, we talked about workers very briefly. The other 2 elements that you're going to be having down here are the home defense and the guides. The bottom of the box here is basically your starting values for everything. Your levels of your workers, your levels of your home city stuff, and then how many flashcards and how many resources you're going to begin with. On the side, again, this is going to be an additional benefit that your faction has in addition. And if you compare these, if we pull up the other boards back here for a second as well, you can see that the values are slightly different in a few of these, especially in the middle rows where you have the price for some of these where the 6 is in the blue, as well as the upgrade for the guides there. And a slight difference here even in the ethers, 2 there, 3 there, 3 there, 3 there, 1 of every color there, as opposed to 2 woods and every color there. So you can see some slight differences between the asymmetry, and they actually run you through the rulebook of like the slight style advantages. The nice thing with an asymmetric situation you have is here that you don't have to play with 1 or certain 2 factions if you're only playing 2-player. You don't have to play with a certain 3 factions if you're playing 3-player. You just play them all, which is kind of nice not to be pigeonholed into that. Now, I mentioned the workers. Those starting worker values on the box as a whole determines how many little stacks of piles you're going to have under your workers here. And as you can see, this guy actually has little shovels right there. This guy actually has little swords. And you can see that these each have 2 under. So that means their values are 2. You would roll 2 dice during a conflict with the soldier for each, stack underneath. And then for each stack underneath the worker, you actually get to gather that many resources on whatever of these terrains that you're on when you do the gather action. In that color, though, has to be on the right color in order to gather from that color. Yeah, right? That makes sense. Last 2 elements of the box that I didn't talk about, then you have the home. So if somebody attacks your home, then that's how many dice you need to roll in order to defend it or have available to you in that sense. And then the guide is allowing you to mitigate, because as I mentioned with some of these dice roll, you're going to need to, roll well. And the more of those you have, it adds an extra bonus, just pure modifier to those dice rolls. What I didn't mention is with 2 of these workers in the same area. Well, in this case, these are both the farmers, the gatherers, so nothing happens. I didn't mention that if you ever have your soldier in an area with someone that is, anything else, conflict happens. Now that can happen in an area like this. That can also happen in, if we go over, blue's city attacking red. That can also happen if blue goes over here and attacks red's city, because they can battle that home defense that I just mentioned. And again, dice rolling initiative based system. Now in the war battles, the lower initiative actually rolls first. And you're going to have a few of these ways to mitigate, like I just mentioned with the homes and the guides, but the stack is going to matter. But the thing is, it's also disincentivized as much as it's incentivized in the first place. Because if you ever have 2 soldiers battle each other, right, they each lose a stack at the end. Whereas if they're with just the gatherers are going to lose a stack and they get retreated. And so you're going to be able to steal resources, though, if you're going after the other team, potentially even more if you go after their city. And the city actually leads me to the next scoring thing, because there are a bunch of circular tokens in this bag right here that all correlate to the end game scoring conditions that you can get in order to achieve those victory points that I mentioned at the beginning of the game. You can see here that several of these stealing somebody else's abilities. Then you have doing this upgraded ability 3 times, like I mentioned earlier. Farming a number of ether. Again, winning certain numbers or certain types of conflicts. Rolling a 12 on that connection board with the extra dice that I mentioned as well. And all of these are represented by the stars you can see at the bottom, which indicates how many victory points you have. Now, victory points are obtained this way. They're obtained with the ability cards, which we'll talk about in a second, but they're also obtained by your mass resources at the end. So it is good to gather the resources, but you can see that these are going to give you a lot more victory points, well, quicker and in more fun ways. Now, the abilities that I mentioned, the third row, when you were cashing in for that little star symbol right here, right? That is where you've got really the coolest part of this game. I mean, I like the action programming a lot, folks, but these abilities are also cool because you've got 7 different abilities here that are going to be able to be used, and they all provide you different income every turn. For example, as I mentioned in the second phase, you get to draw 1 flashcard. Now in this one, you get an extra flashcard. So now you're getting 2 flashcards every turn. That's awesome. You get 2 victory points for that. You just get an ether passively during every turn. You get 2 bonus points to your soldier conflict whenever you're rolling it. Awesome. You just get 3 resources, 1 of each kind during your passive phase. Then you get connection +2. Then you just get 10 resources, or you get a +2 if you're home defense. So there's lots of different ways that you're going to be able to modify in different aspects, avenues, and to your whim, customizing your approach to this, which is really attuned to the asymmetric factions in the first place. And they even give little tips in the rule book of saying, if you're this faction, you should probably angle this way. Now, I didn't cover all the rules, like the sense that if you're going downhill, because people are wondering why this elevation is actually going on with these cardboard boxes, because if you go downhill, you actually, well, get momentum. So if you go down, you choose to go down to the green one here, well, I'm going down, so I can actually go an extra bonus space to the red one, but the red one's below the green one, so I still have an extra momentum. So now all of a sudden I could reach up to here, or I could reach over here with just 1 movement. So you can see that I really could get further if I want to, depending on how aggressive you want to be in this game. And that's where at the higher player counts, this is actually going to be a very crowded map. You are going to run into people at higher player counts. In the lower player counts, you really don't have to, at the 2 player count, as you can see here, run into a whole lot of people in that sense. But at 3, gosh knows at 4, you're going to be having conflict. And, let's go straight into the pros and cons, because essentially, like I said, after you do 7 rounds of this action programming, that's it. The game's over, right? And so you're going to be making these cool combinations on your board in whatever order you have, trying to get extra options so you have more actions during your individual turns, because otherwise you are very limited in your actions in the first place. And let's just go with this board here for a second. This iconography, I thought it was going to be a little bit confusing. It's not. It's really, really intuitive, and I really, really like it. And they're trying to make it more language independent. One of the little guides I have in the prototype was actually only all French. So I was a little concerned when I got it, but it didn't stop me at all, because I learned it really quickly and it really made sense. It wasn't anything overly complicated in that sense. They didn't use crazy terms to describe things that you're going to be familiar with, which was nice. The iconography on these cards and these abilities is all just straightforward, and that's refreshing. Now, the other pro is I really, really like the main mechanism of this game. This action programming, I don't always like action programming. Action programming is very hit or miss, I feel like, in board games. Because what you can have is you can have a lot of stalemate, or you can have a lot of conjunction or interference by other people and other things going on in the board. And this can happen. And, it may happen if you're moving your soldier around. And that's probably going to be the biggest con here in a second. But it really allows you the freedom of how you're going to be doing this, how you're going to manipulate things. And it's also a game that I didn't feel like I was super frustrated by my lack of ability to get resources, right? It doesn't make it like super easy, but it also doesn't hold out on you, because there's games out there with a resource management style of things in the Euro realm that make resources really hard and obtuse to get. And I really get frustrated by my inability to get that. And so this game doesn't force you to just get resources and make that no, it's how you utilize those resources. The other pro and con in this game, I'm going to tell you right now, is the take that. Because there is take that. Like I said, with some of those icon flashcards, with some of the end game scoring victory conditions, stealing resources, defeating someone else's home base, right? You are directly attacking them. And so you may be able to maneuver directly around them to this side, or you may just be able to go directly to their city, and there may not be a whole lot of that. Also, like I said, you may have 2 dice to roll. You may have, 3 dice to roll, but what if you roll 1, 1, and 2? Even that +2 mitigation isn't going to save you from losing. And therein lies both the blessing and the curse, is that you are a little bit dice dependent. And as a more heavily action programming Euro style game, the conflict doesn't it doesn't jive with me as much as I was expecting, right? Like on this channel, I love chaos. I love take that. But it felt just a little bit no, not what I was going for in this game, right? Like I got so focused on the awesome action programming of how I'm going to take this and how I'm going to do this that, you know, you almost wish that both of these were gatherers, right? And you could move and do double, but you're having to move the soldier. And the fun, tricky part as well about the action programming, right? When you use this move action, you don't have to assign who you're going to be moving it to. You just assign it, and then you could decide, you know, after 2 or 3 other people go that, well, I was going to move my soldier, but now I'm actually going to move my digger. And I'm going to go differently than I was planning. Now that may mess up the rest of your stuff, or it may not. And that's where the flexibility is going to really come in handy, as well as upgrading those extra actions to get 5 and 6. Are the factions asymmetric? Yeah. Are they that much different? I don't really know. I don't have enough gameplay in it to really tell you. The flashcards, again, are really cool. I wasn't expecting to like the flashcards. It's just kind of like, okay, everybody gets a flashcard on phase 2. And then you're like, oh, this flashcard is really good. This flashcard just gave me exactly what I needed. This flashcard just changed my thought process going into the phase 3 of where I'm going to put my action programming in the first place, because all of a sudden it gave me the 3 resources that I was going to go try and get and gather, but now I don't need to get and gather them. So maybe I'm going to go elsewhere and get different stuff and gather ether and do something else completely differently to change my game plan. And to be able to pivot on that very quickly with the use of just one little draw card was actually relatively pleasing. And the season cards, again, I don't really know or care as much about the initiative, although it's nice that it's random. It really just keeps the game short and sweet. Like when it says 60 minutes, you're going to play this in 60 minutes, even if you have 4 players, which is very refreshing. This game could easily overstay its welcome if you had a lot of that, because you do have some analysis paralysis potential with laying down those numbered initiative tokens on your individual board. But because you can't see what other people do, and because you have to all program at the same time and then reveal and just go, well, awesome. You know, it takes some of that out. So it gets rid of that element, but that's going to be also a divisive element as a con for some people, because you're going to be stuck with a program that doesn't quite benefit you at the very end as much as you should have or wanted to in the first place, because you couldn't see what other people are going to do. And because now that soldier is in the way of where you were going to move and you're stuck moving and you're kind of screwed. So, I mean, that could happen in that sense. Again, with the dice rolling as well, you can't mitigate it always, but it does have some mitigation factor, which I was pleasantly surprised by. Other con or other thing that you may not like is I don't really know about the victory point spread, right? Like the games were mostly close, but at the same time, I don't really know how it corresponds with some of these ability tokens as well, because some of the higher, stronger abilities also have a little bit more victory points in addition to this. So it's a little bit tricky. Some of these, you know, why would you necessarily go after them? And maybe I'm playing that wrong, because maybe there is some option there that you need to do differently than what we were playing. But again, like the balancing and the scaling from that, as well as the end game victory points, I mean, that'd be the only thing that I'd be looking at some point and going, okay, that's, you know, post-production, make that smooth, really fine tune that to make sure that all of those are distributed in a very equal manner. And again, that's me with very limited experience, so I'm assuming that there is some key strategy behind that I'm just missing in my limited plays. The other thing I had a little bit of trouble with, and I've got one of the rules pages out here so I can blow it up in front of the camera here, is that connection table. It just didn't feel as connected with all the other stuff, and it even self-describes it here in the rulebook as high risk, high reward. Just let me show you what I mean by that. So here, if you can read this, the blown up section, right? This is supposed to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you can see that they start to number 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And so when you get that action, you get to roll a die, or +2, you know, dice essentially, if you have that special ability that I showed you at the beginning, or any other modifiers that you have in addition. And so as you go up, right, like a 7 gets you 4 resources, an 8 gets you 2 ether, a 9 gets you increasing your soldier without paying the cost, 2 flashcards, 1 booster, 1 connection victory point token. So, I mean, yes, but also it seems like, at least in our games, that was really not heavily utilized in that manner, right? Because it is high risk, high reward. When I can just pull out this and instead, you know, get some of this stuff for a slight cost, but also get it for sure. And so that, again, I could see just not quite fitting in with the rest of the game for me personally. So I wouldn't mind seeing some tweaks from that. But again, it's me not being a game designer, and I leave that up to them. And it's a cool mechanism, but maybe the incentive to go for it, you know, really make it worthwhile if you're going to go for it, right? Go bust. If you're going to call it high risk, high reward, make it high risk, high reward. Apart from just, you know, potentially that's maybe the other downside is if you do roll low, which again, I don't know why, if you thought you were going to roll low, if you only roll 1 die or only have like a +2 overall, why you would even consider it in the first place, because you may not have it. And I have a whole bunch of other things that I can potentially do on this board that are going to be potentially better as well. So, you know, from a risk standpoint, I don't know why I would risk as much when I can get something more because the benefit doesn't really, for me personally in our plays, didn't outscale the risk of doing it, if that makes sense. So all in all, what do I think of Ethereum? I'm very, very pleased with this game. I am highly surprised by it. Again, I won't say I'm the biggest fan of the 3D aesthetic. I mean, it could be very well accomplished with other things, but they've gone for, I think, a lower price cost, with the cardboard as opposed to something more solid, or even just little like wooden tiles that could just stack up, but it wouldn't be interconnected and you couldn't, necessarily keep it as together. It reminds me a little bit of the Everdell tree in the Life of Amazonia waterfall, if you've seen those, where it's fine and it gives it more of a table presence, which it absolutely does. But I don't think it's 100% necessary for my own personal taste. But it definitely gives that stand out comparatively to its counterparts as well. The combination of the Euro as well as the interaction, again, this is going to be where the tricky part is. Do you like the optimization, resource management, awesome action selection programming, but the potential for real conflict at higher player counts that's going to be unavoidable? If people are moving their soldiers around aggressively, you just inevitably might run into them a little bit more than you want, especially with a die-based combat system that not only can hurt you, but hurt both of you if you're not careful with it. That's what you kind of have to ask yourself. I really like the mitigation. I really love the abilities. I love the flashcards, and I love the action programming system. They've got quite a combination of things here that I was not expecting the individual parts to be greater in the sense of the sum. And so I'm really intrigued to kind of see what a final product looks like for this, what else they have in store, because again, like I said, with some of these season cards, it looks like they have a couple additional faction icons on there. So what other elements, what other secrets in store do they have for the crowdfunding campaign? Interested to see? Tune in right along with you guys. There you go. Thank you for sending me this copy of a prototype to play. Thoughts, comments, questions, concerns down below. Very, very, very nice surprise of a game as a whole to start off the year in January of 2024 here. So this one's going to be, if they can flesh this one out, this one's going to be a real sleeper hit for people, I think, going forward. So there you go. Ethereum. Thanks for watching. Stay classy. Go check out their crowdfunding campaign. And, well, if you do, well, tell them Liege sent you. So you don't have to back it, but just tell them Liege sent you. You could, though. Either way. Do you. See you around.